September 12, 1992, 3:44 p.m., an M152 at mile marker 58 near Emery Pass overlook, Gila National Forest, New Mexico. Officer Brooke Carter, Unit 312, keyed her mic. Code 7, meal break M58, by the Old Stone Bridge. Dispatcher Erica Valdez logged the entry, routine as dust on the switchbacks. 30 minutes to check back, one ribbon of asphalt to ride, blue sky holding steady over the pines. Then the radio went quiet. In 1999, something hidden in these canyons would surface and bend the story open. What happened to Officer Brooke Carter? Out here, who decides what the road keeps? The first thing people remembered about Brooke wasn't the badge or the chrome. It was the way she stopped for strangers like they were neighbors. Loose gas caps, boiling radiators, a flat gone soft in the heat. She kept jumper cables tucked into her saddlebag and a small toolkit wrapped in an old bandana, the same faded red sheet had since the academy. She was 34, 5'7", brown hair pulled tight and clean under the helmet, uniform pressed so sharp you'd think the fabric held its own spine. In 9 years patrolling M152, she had never missed a shift, never raised her voice, never treated a scared driver with anything but calm. That Saturday began clear and dry over Grant County, the kind of September air that makes distant ridges look carved and exact. Brooke rolled in at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes early, as usual, ran her gear check, tested the radio, logged the weather. She skimmed the overnight reports, chatted with Erica about her evening plan to swing by her mother Evelyn's house for pot roast if she beat the dusk. The bike caught the morning light and answered with a low, warm thrum. By 7:30 she was out on the ridge, where the highway threads between stone and sky and the wind smells like pine sap and old rain. Traffic moved easy for a weekend, locals with feed in the truck bed, a few tourists hunting overlooks, a church van rolling gentle towards Silver City. Brooke knew every mile marker like a set of familiar faces. She paused near Lake Roberts for a quick look at a pickup steaming at the shoulder, waved off when the driver showed a jug of water and a grateful smile. At 2:32 p.m., Rosie at the Mimber station poured her the usual black coffee and slid over a chocolate donut Brooke pretended to debate before laughing and taking anyway. No sign of hurry, no hint of storm in her voice or eyes. Just another clean line of a good day drawn across the map. At 3:44 p.m., she called the code 7 from mile 58, voice crisp, breathing steady. The Old Stone Bridge sat a few bends down, a leftover from an earlier cut of the road, shadow pooled under its arch where a dry wash waited for rain. Erica stamped the time in the log. The clock turned slow for a while, the way it does when nothing's wrong. By 4:30, Brooke should have keyed in again, kicked the bike alive, and drifted back into the dispatch chatter that knits a county together. Erica tried her once at 4:45. Static. Again at 5:15, this time with the badge number 312, status? The only answer was the wind hissing over a mountain spine older than the highway and the people who laid it. Sergeant Daniel Rhodes reached for the search protocol at 5:40 and didn't let go. He sent 2 units west from Silver City, another east from Hillsboro, asked state police to cut low over the ridge before the light died. By 6 p.m., the first patrol cars slipped under the same blue evening Brooke had ridden into. Their bars washed the pines in red and blue, then red and blue again, as if color could persuade the forest to speak. Volunteers arrived with headlamps, lanterns, and thermoses passed across tailgates. Farmers left half-stacked hay to walk the drainage lines. Wives mapped sectors on unfolded county maps, thumbs anchoring the corners against the breeze. Children were sent to cousins' houses with a whispered explanation and a promise to call. They found the place she'd named and the shoulder where a motorcycle might have rested. No skid marks. No shimmer of broken glass. No coins spilled from a pocket, no torn fabric in the weeds. They swept the ditch line with a slow, careful patience. They ran dogs along the verge and into the brush. The air cooled. Coyotes called to one another from somewhere the human light couldn't reach. In the narrow hours, the searchers gathered in a loose circle by the bridge and listened to Rhodes assign a fresh pattern for dawn. The highway hummed its thin night music and said nothing back. If you've lived long enough in a place like this, You learn how quickly the civilized world funnels into one two-lane road and how easily that road can tilt into wilderness. The line is thin. One bend, one pullout, one decision to stop for 10 minutes against the rail. A uniform means order, but the pines don't bargain with patches of cloth and stitched names. Brooke knew that as well as anyone. Still, she had trusted the route she rode 100 times, the same way we trust our steps across a dark room toward a light switch we've never missed. By first light on Sunday, the helicopters beat a rhythm that carried for miles. The command post took shape near the Lake Roberts turnoff. Folding tables, topo maps, a tangle of pushpins. Calls went out to ranch gates and cabin doors. Text pagers buzzed. The diner opened early and threw eggs and coffee at the problem because that's what you do when you can't do anything else. Evelyn showed up holding Brooke's old mug, the one with a chip that looks like a tiny New Mexico, and stared down the ridge as if her daughter might round the bend laughing about a dead battery and a lost hour. People who'd only ever received a warning from Brooke's patient hand now bent over maps and asked where to look next. The ridge gave back the sound of rotor wash, the flash of vests, the crunch of boots in gravel. It did not give back a woman. Not on that day, not on the long night that followed, not when the sun lifted and made the mile markers shine like polished teeth. Somewhere between the old stone bridge and the plan to be home by dark, the story missed a page. The highway kept moving. The forest kept its counsel. And a community that had never lost an officer to anything but retirement found itself staring at a silence that felt like a living thing. Who wrote the missing page and where did they hide the pen? By dawn the ridge looked bleached clean, as if the night had rinsed it and set it back on the hanger. Helicopters came first, thudding over Emery Pass and dragging long shadows across the switchbacks. Their rotors beat the same 3 notes over and over, the kind of rhythm that gets under your skin and won't leave. Troopers parked at the Lake Roberts turnoff and hauled out topo maps, pushpins, and rolls of fluorescent tape. The wind played with the corners until someone pinned them down. Every few minutes a radio cracked alive, and Erica Valdez's voice threaded through the static, steady and warm, the one grounded sound in a morning built from guesswork. People arrived because that's what people do. A rancher with sunburned forearms. A retired teacher who had taught half the county how to diagram sentences. Teenagers in cross-country hoodies, trying to act older than the fear in their eyes. They signed their names, grabbed grid assignments, and tied orange tape to their pack straps. Someone dragged over a folding table and called it the canteen. Coffee steamed in paper cups, eggs hissed on a camp stove, a cooler snapped open to reveal oranges and bottled water. The first prayer of the day was practical. Let the radio batteries last. Let the dogs find what eyes can't. They fanned out along arroyos and game trails, boot soles crunching on decomposed granite. The sun was already higher than anyone wanted. You could feel it in the back of your neck, that ruthless reminder that New Mexico doesn't slow down for heartache. A team traced the dry bed of the Mimbres branch that slips under the old stone bridge, reading the ground the way you read a face, looking for anything off. Another team glassed the slopes above mile marker 58, binoculars scanning for disturbed brush, a scuff, a reflection that didn't belong. When the dogs picked up energy near a cluster of pinyon, everybody looked up at once, the way people do at a fireworks show, only to watch the signal drift and thin. Pieces of the last clean hours came through like radio fragments. Rosie from the Mimbres station, wiping the counter with a rag that smelled like lemons, remembered Brooke grinning at the donut she'd pretended to refuse. A trucker named Darren thought he'd seen a patrol bike ghost past a turnout by a shallow culvert around 3:45, but he couldn't swear it was her. A fisherman swore he heard a motorcycle idle hard, then ease off, somewhere past the overlook, yet he hadn't seen dust in the air. The smaller the clue, the more gently people carried it, palms cupped as if holding something that might fly. By mid-morning, Sergeant Daniel Rhodes had a sector map frostbitten with pushpins. He stood over it with the posture of a man fighting the urge to run, one hand on the table, the other listing resources into a notebook. He sent an ATV pair to check a rough spur where rockfall had narrowed the shoulder. He sent 2 deputies to knock on cabin doors up M35, asking owners to glance at their trail cams. He asked a pilot to run a slower pass over a slope littered with scree where a bike could tumble without leaving a headline. He did not say the thing everyone felt. Time stretches in a search until it snaps, and when it snaps, it can cut. Evelyn Carter arrived holding Brooke's chipped mug like a relic. "The chip looks like our state," she told anyone who would listen, a smile that broke apart before it landed. Lena printed missing posters on a portable inkjet that spit out pages the wind tried to steal. Men in ball caps chased them and smoothed them down with flat palms. Donations folded into a coffee can, then overflowed to a small lockbox. Someone started a reward fund that passed $20,000 before lunch. A quiet line formed. People who remembered a warning Brooke had given with mercy, or a time she'd stood behind them on a lonely shoulder until help came. They wanted to do something that counted, and counting dollars felt like a start. You could feel the story stitching itself to the people who were living it. That's how a place holds on to its own. If you're watching this unfold and you know roads like ours, roads that double as lifelines, stay with the search. Keep your eyes on the map with us. When a new thread surfaces, you'll want to be there the moment it glints, and we'll follow it together, one careful step at a time. By early afternoon, the heat pulled moisture from the wash and left the air tasting metallic. A deputy found a gas receipt in the gravel, and one of the teenagers found a quarter pressed into the dirt, but neither meant anything to anyone. The dogs kept working, tails flagging, tongues out. A second helicopter circled wider, the pilot's voice lower now, more careful around the edges. On the ridge above, a hawk rode a thermal and hung there, suspended by something you couldn't see. Down below, the old stone bridge held its shade, as patient as a closed mouth. Around 3, Erica's voice came over the net, soft as if she were speaking into a sleeping house, asking for any unit with eyes on Unit 312 to respond. It sounded like a ritual by then. A bell rung on the hour because you have to do something on the hour, and silence is a poor husband for fear. The answer was the same: wind, static, and the mountain saying nothing at all. Rhodes closed his eyes and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. He opened them and drew a new line on the map. If nobody wrote the missing page, maybe the page tore itself out. They built theories because theories feel like handrails in a stairwell with no lights. The first one fit the morning like a glove: mechanical failure. A tire picked up a nail on a gravel splice, a belt seized, the fuel line coughed. Brooke might have eased the bike onto the shoulder, swung her leg off, and gone looking for a signal or a friendly doorbell. Out here, a few wrong steps in scrub and granite can turn into a maze. The second theory was quieter, more intimate, and it hurt the people who loved her to say it out loud. A sudden medical event. A syncope drop, a spike in blood sugar, a heat feint that tipped the world sideways. The third one arrived with the taste of metal. Someone who knew the slow hours of a Saturday, the blind corners, the way a uniform stops to help even when she's tired. The fourth was a whisper that offended the memory of the woman they knew: voluntary disappearance. Brooke didn't run. Everyone who said her name said that part first. Weeks stretched thin and then tore. Autumn rain found the seams in the hills and unstitched the surface. Mud took impressions and then let them go. The search became a rhythm the county learned like church music: grid, sweep, brief, pray, repeat, until the choir grew small and the hymn lost its words. City budget meetings spoke softly about priorities. Regional news trucks rolled away one by one, their satellite dishes folding like tired flowers. In the squad room, Brooke's chair stayed put. Nobody sat there even when space got tight. The patch on the wall that held her portrait collected dust you could see if the afternoon light caught it slantwise. In the spring of 1994, a man who did not belong to the county's old stories walked through the door with a box of binders, a neat haircut, and a face lined more by stubbornness than years. Detective Miguel Alvarez had spent 15 years in Kansas City working robberies and homicides, learning the way secrets breed in crowded places. The transfer to Grant County looked like a mercy to some and a demotion to others. To Alvarez, it was a choice with a pulse. He began by doing the thing everyone promised they had already done: reading everything. He sat under the ceiling fan in a borrowed office, flipped pages, chewed the cap off a ballpoint, and marked margins with a system that made sense only to him. He did not speak loudly. He did not rush. He built a map. He pinned Brooke's last radio at mile 58. He pinned a rancher who vanished in 1991 driving alone toward a feed supplier. He pinned a repairman from 1990 whose van never made it over the pass, last seen by a store owner who remembered the color of his cap but not his license plate. The 3 pins formed an uneven triangle around the old stone bridge and a stand of pinion that had burned and receded a decade earlier. Alvarez drew careful lines that traced arroyos and old service roads and a couple of ghost tracks only people on horseback remembered. He wrote times in black ink and possible paths in blue. When he finished the first draft, he sat very still and listened to the building hum. The map did not shout. It suggested. He drove the road the way Brooke would have, windows down, radio off, speaking mile markers under his breath like a catechism. He stopped where the shoulder widened and where it didn't. He stood under the bridge and let his eyes adjust to that stubborn pocket of shade. He took photographs of nothing and labeled them with care, because the nothing was part of the point. In the diner that lent him a corner booth, he introduced himself and watched as conversations kinked and changed direction the way a stream does when you lay a branch across it. A group of men in ball caps talked louder about elk tags when he sat down. When he stood, the volume dropped and the topic drifted away from animals to weather. An older woman drying coffee cups told him to try the pecan pie and not to worry the past more than it wanted to be worried. She smiled, then watched the door like she was waiting on someone who wouldn't come. He asked for trail cam footage. A few people produced it. More people promised to look and let the promise age in place. He requested old highway maintenance logs and found entries that jumped months with no explanation. He asked the hospital for intake records from September of 1992 and got a stack that looked trimmed at the edges, as if someone had cut the paper to fit a file. He kept his notes polite. He signed requests with a steady hand. At home, where the house was smaller than his last one and the nights carried coyotes instead of sirens, he woke twice to the sensation of standing at the edge of a pool he couldn't see the bottom of. He visited Evelyn and Lena, not once, but in a cadence that felt like respect. He sat on a sofa that had learned the shape of grief, drank coffee out of a chipped mug, and let the women tell him stories that had nothing to do with maps. The way Brooke lined up her shoes on the mat, the ridiculous cat she once rescued from a culvert, the habit she had of knocking twice on an open door before stepping through it. When Alvarez left, he stood on the porch a long time and looked at the mountain line like it might answer a question if he held his breath long enough. In small places, silence is not absence, it is arrangement. Threads show if you angle the light right. Alvarez believed in angles. He ran his finger over the triangle he'd drawn and thought about pressure points, about how a road can be both artery and trap, about what a patient person with a practical mind and a mean streak might build if given time and solitude. He called a geology student at the community college, someone he'd seen at a public talk about floodplains, and asked her about the way stormwater moves metal and bone. Somewhere between the math and the map, something clicked, not loud, but true. And when a truth clicks, it asks for proof. They chose a Saturday in late May because storms had rinsed the canyons clean and left the beds readable. Alvarez stood with Naomi Pierce at the edge of a shallow ravine, sun on their shoulders, the kind of light that erases doubt and forces you to see what's actually there. Naomi had spread a laminated map across a truck hood and traced a finger along blue pencil lines that weren't rivers but possibilities, where flash floods push metal, where heavier objects snag in bends and eddies of stone. She talked about gradient, about velocity decay, and Alvarez translated her science into a hunter's patience. He had marked the old stone bridge and then followed the fall line 2¼ miles. If Brooke's bike moved after rain, it would move like this. The volunteers worked the ravine like a comb through long hair, teeth wide and deliberate. One man swung a metal detector that hummed to itself, bored until it suddenly wasn't. Others used garden rakes and gloved hands to peel back seasons of debris, sticks, silt, glass polish to milky softness. The air held the faint mineral bite that comes when water leaves and heat takes over. Far above, traffic drifted the way clouds do, unaware of what the ground was about to return. Jim Caldwell found it first, not because the machine shouted but because a coin of light winked off a curve of chrome. He crouched and brushed away a tangle of rabbit brush with the tenderness you use on a sleeping child. Handlebars emerged from the earth like bone. The call went up without panic. Nobody ran, they moved with the quiet of people who know a miracle can be spooked. Alvarez covered the distance at a steady walk that felt like an ache. There it was, tipped on its side in hardened mud, prairie grass threaded through the spokes, the badge number stenciled on the frame scuffed but legible, 312. For a long second he didn't breathe. He took in damage the way a medic reads a chart. The front fairing wore scrapes that didn't track with a hard tumble. The brake lever bent at an angle you'd get if a hand had forced it, not if rock had. The mirrors were intact. The pipes weren't crushed. A thief's logic had passed through. A few pricey components were gone, cleanly unbolted, not torn away. Above the ravine, the lip where a crash should have announced itself was smooth. No gouge, no scatter, no story written in the road. Alvarez felt the shape of another human mind in it, a person who had planned, or at least cleaned. They taped off the area. Cameras clicked. Tag numbers went on bagged screws as if they'd grown there. Alvarez crouched in the scrub and photographed absence. The undisturbed shoulder, the way grasses lay, the fact that nothing smelled like gasoline. He stood, turned slowly, and listened for a sound that didn't belong. On the far side of the pit, a deputy called him over to a scuffed oval in the dirt where a helmet might have rested. 15 feet away, under a trowel's width of silt, Naomi pried up the helmet itself. The shell was cracked but not spiderwebbed. Alvarez held it like something that could speak if you asked correctly. He thumbed the lining and felt a roughness where the foam separated from the shell. It was the kind of defect you only notice with years of habit. He pinched the seam and it gave enough to show a paper edge, mottled and thin as onion skin from time and heat. He eased it free millimeter by millimeter. The note came out reluctant, a ghost that wasn't sure it wanted to be visible. Ink had bloomed and drowned in places. In others, it held. 3 lines survived in a hand he recognized from the personnel forms he had studied until the strokes felt personal. If found, check the old drift. BC. He stared at the words and felt the day tilt. Brooke had lived long enough to leave a message. She had thought like a cop, like a person who believes in breadcrumbs. But old drift wasn't English to most ears. Alvarez lifted his chin toward Naomi. She was already nodding. In this country, a drift is a lateral tunnel off a main shaft, an old miner's attempt to follow vein. Maps in her backpack showed speckles of history all around them. Pinos Altos cuts, forgotten headings, mouths boarded up and sun-blanched. One, a short lateral near a wash, sat 600 yards downstream, marked with a name that sounded like a dare, La Paloma. They moved as if the ground might erase itself if they went too slow. The mouth of La Paloma was exactly the color of the hillside, a trick of camouflage perfected by time. A sagging timber brace slouched above a dark slit. Sunflowers leaned along the uphill side, their heads at half-mast in the heat. Someone, years ago, had wired a gate across the opening. Someone, more recently, had loosened one corner to make a person-sized hole. The air that breathed out was old metal and damp slate, not rotten, but patient. Alvarez knelt and studied the dust by the threshold. A boot heel had pressed there, then weather had half softened it. He reached for his flashlight and felt the familiar lightness in his chest that signals fear and its close cousin, awe. They announced themselves the way you announce yourself to a house at night. Quietly, with respect, as if you might wake something you'd rather meet in daylight. The beam swept over rock ribs and left behind fine motes that took too long to settle. A few steps in, the temperature dropped and the day shrank to a tunnel with edges you could touch. There were scuffs on the wall at shoulder height, the kind of marks a person leaves when they steady themselves and keep going. Alvarez tasted dust and realized his mouth had gone dry. He said Brooke's name once, a test of what the mine would do with it. The mine kept it. The first artifact they saw wasn't dramatic. It was a flattened circle where something had rested and then been picked up. Beside it, a blackened coil of cotton string that could have been used for anything or nothing. Against the wall, a rectangle of cleaner rock suggested a space that had been sheltered. And then, in the undercut where the drift widened, the cone of light found a shape that did not belong to geology at all. What waits in the quiet that people build underground? They found the shape by accident, the way you find your breath after you've been holding it too long, suddenly and all at once. In the widened pocket of the drift, The flashlights settled on a low arrangement of stones that ringed a patch of scorched earth. The fire had been small and cautious, the work of someone who understood how smoke carries secrets. Nearby, a sleeping roll lay flattened, its nylon dulled by grit, and a pair of empty water jugs leaned against the wall like animals that had learned to wait. Naomi knelt and ran a finger over a soot-blackened pan. Alvarez crouched opposite her and felt the air change inside his chest. Survival has a temperature. You recognize it when you step into the room where it happened. He swept his beam along the rock. In the corner, a small cache had been made with care. Matches sealed in plastic, gauze wrapped around a roll of tape, a packet of saltine crumbs pinched shut with a paper clip. On a ledge just above shoulder height, Brooke's department radio sat upright, as if she'd set it there to remind herself that the world existed beyond the stone. The batteries had died long before the day decided to remember her, but you could still feel the intent in the placement, like a sailor propping a lantern in a porthole. Alvarez touched the antenna and the radio rocked and settled, an object that had been a companion before it became evidence. He kept moving in slow circles until the beam caught a notebook warped by damp. The cover was the kind you buy at a drugstore without thinking. He lifted it with both hands and set it on his thigh like it might bruise if he turned it too fast. Pages clung, then released with a soft sound that belonged to kitchens and laundry lines, not mines. Ink had bled in places, but there were pages that held. The first entry ran steady and spare, sentences cut down to their muscle. Laid the bike down by the wash. Left leg banged, ribs sore. No radio out here. Shelter for now. Ration water. She recorded hours as if they were inventory, marking when the light outside shifted and what she ate, how far she made it up the incline before dizziness stitched stars across her field of view. She listed small victories. Splint tightened. Heat manageable. Bandage changed. Days, she stopped writing the names, pressed forward. Her handwriting loosened, then steadied, then shrank again. She made rules for herself, like a person who knows the mind is the first thing that will try to quit. Save one good thought for the dark, speak out loud even if no one answers, do not count backward. Twice she described climbing for the entrance in the cool of morning, reaching the lip, getting hit by light like a door, noise somewhere beyond, a truck maybe, or wind turning a loose sign into speech. Each time she turned back, ashamed and alive. She drew the drift roughly, adding arrows to show the pockets of better air and the safe spots under the ceiling. On one page she listed what she wanted when she got out. Oranges, a shower so hot it stung, her mother's pot roast, a good laugh with Erica about a donut. The list ends midline, as if she fell asleep holding it. The last entry that still wore its letters had a date more felt than seen. October 7, 1992, underlined but wavering. Voices near the mouth. Bites. Going home. The sentence was so ordinary that Alvarez almost missed the fact that it was extraordinary. He read it again and saw what it dared. She had not died in here, not on that day. She had seen someone, or believed she had, and she had moved toward them. He felt the breath he'd been saving leave him without permission. They searched the chamber for the other half of that promise and found only the imprint of what used to be. Someone had gathered the loose things at some point and made them neat. That kind of tidiness arrives with hope or with endings. News traveled faster than it had any right to. Before the afternoon cooled, an old man called in from a ranch 5 miles as the crow flies, a voice that sounded like fence wire and sun. Walt Henderson told Alvarez that in October of '92 he'd come across a woman walking unsteady along a wash on his property, uniform torn, eyes bright with fever. He said he'd put her in his truck and driven east, 60 miles to the county hospital, because Silver City felt too far for what he thought he was seeing. He said he'd waited in the parking lot until a nurse took the woman inside and then left because he still had cattle to check. He had not learned her name. He was sorry. It had been a long time. Alvarez called the hospital. Records arrived with gaps you could fit your fist through. A system migration in '95, the administrator said, had eaten some of the old files. Staff from that month had scattered, retired, or died. The intake log around the week in question bore a cut edge, a tiny crescent that suggested trimming, or maybe the paper had simply frayed with handling and air. You can make a conspiracy out of anything if you're hungry enough, he told himself, and then reminded himself that hunger is the engine that turns questions into answers. He requested the corporate ownership chain for the hospital and received a diagram that meandered through private companies like a slow river through cattails. He kept his tone civil and his pen moving. When he brought the journal to Evelyn and Lena, they touched it like a living thing. Evelyn pressed her fingertips to the page that carried "Going Home" and closed her eyes. Lena read aloud the part about oranges and laughed a little in a voice that broke on the last word. Alvarez didn't promise what he couldn't promise. He told them what he knew. Brooke had survived those first days. She had left a message. She might have stepped into daylight and into a truck. It was a lot and not enough. He set the notebook on the coffee table and rested his hand on it for a moment before he stood. If she made it out, where did the trail choose to disappear again? By the time summer burned itself out on the ridges, the case had learned how to wait. Waiting is not empty, it is a posture, and Grant County wore it like a uniform. Miguel Alvarez kept moving because moving was the only way he knew to hold off the gravity of maybe. He filed requests that came back thinned by time, chased rumors that smelled like warmed-over coffee, and stood in rooms where silence behaved like furniture. Some nights he drove the length of M152 and spoke Brooke's name at the mile markers, 56, 57, 58, as if a syllable might loosen a nail in the door the truth hid behind. When the sheriff called him in to say the budget had stopped understanding what he was doing, he nodded and waited until his throat felt steady enough to answer. He did not argue. He took his files home, the way you carry a sleeping child, careful of the head. The town learned a ritual for a thing you cannot resolve. Every September, Lena printed a new photograph, never the one from the academy, always the one where Brooke's smile looked like an invitation instead of a performance, and taped it to a poster board with the date and the mile marker. People signed the margin with messages that were more like promises than prayers. At Lake Roberts, candles made small lakes of wax that dried into shapes you could read if you were willing to invent an alphabet. The fire department began offering a seasonal course on trail safety and radio basics. A church youth group assembled car kindness kits, water, a can of Fix-A-Flat, a cheap flashlight, a note that said, "If you're reading this, someone cared enough to leave it where you'd find it." In the spring, Evelyn sat on the porch with a book she didn't turn. She kept Brooke's room exactly as it had been, not because she couldn't bear to change it, but because the habit felt like respect. Alvarez visited on the days when his calendar claimed he had nowhere else to be. He carried updates that were more posture than progress and gave them gently. Sometimes they talked about other things, weather, a recipe that refused to work, a neighbor who had decided to raise chickens and was losing the argument. Grief makes a person into a historian of the ordinary. Their conversations stored small dignities the way a creek stores light. When he retired in 2000, Alvarez did it in a hallway instead of a ceremony. The department gave him a shadow box with a badge and a pin and a space that looked like it wanted a photograph. He went home and put the box on a bookcase that sagged in the middle. Nights shifted again. Coyotes still made their torn music. Wind still ran the ridges. But the feeling of being plugged into a map faded, and with it the phone calls that used to arrive at breaking points in his sleep. He woke before dawn on the anniversary and laid his hands on the file the way a person warms a stone for luck. Retirement, he discovered, was only a different kind of waiting. What a case like this leaves behind isn't a hole. It's an overlay. You drive past the old stone bridge and see two bridges, the one that carries cars and the one that carries a question. You pull into the Mimber station and the coffee tastes the same, but you look at the door the way you look at a door when you're listening for someone who's late. You stand at a ridge and list what can be seen from there, and the list is longer than the view. Stories change shape to fit the people who hold them. This one learned the outline of a county and then learned the outline of the people who left and took it with them. There were moments when the surface thinned. A nurse who had worked a week of nights in October '92 sent a letter to say she remembered a woman who wouldn't give a name, who flinched at the sound of a radio, who slept with her hand closed around nothing. The nurse apologized for the uncertainty. Memory is a generous liar. A box of microfilm arrived from a storage vendor, mislabeled, containing a month of admissions that did not belong to this county at all. Alvarez slid the reel onto the machine anyway and scrolled through Stranger's Pain until he had to stand up and step outside. On the hospital lawn, sprinklers clicked a metronome onto grass that ignored them. The feeling he had then was not defeat. It was duration. When a community cannot solve a mystery, it learns how to live with it without letting it harden into superstition or cynicism. Silver City did not become a place where people crossed themselves at mile marker 58. It became a place where strangers waved onto shoulders sooner, where hazard lights blinked sooner, where the back of a patrol bike meant not just law but accompaniment. The badge on the wall stopped gathering dust. Someone wiped it on Friday afternoons because rituals work better when they are ordinary. On the anniversary, a girl too young to know what had happened asked why there were candles by the water, and an old man said, "Because sometimes you light the shore so a boat can find its way," and no one corrected him. The lesson is simple the way a stone is simple. Take care of one another on the road between your house and the world. Ask for help sooner than your pride allows. Keep looking even when the map looks finished. Some answers arrive late and still count. And if they never come, let your courage be the closure you give each other.